This is Almond Alert presented by LMC Manufacturing.
Well, welcome to Almond Alert, the podcast brought to you by Almond Alliance, where we dive into critical topics impacting the almond industry. I'm Rojewski, your host for today's insightful discussion on the Farm Bill. Joining us are two distinguished guests with profound experience in ag and politics. First, I have the honor of welcoming Secretary Johanns, a pivotal figure in American agriculture. The Secretary served as the 28th Secretary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture from 2005 to 2007, bringing his deep-rooted ag knowledge from his upbringing on a family dairy. His extensive public service also includes terms as the Governor of Nebraska and a U.S. Senator from the state. Joining him is Senator Heidi Heitkamp, a trailblazer in American politics. The senator represented North Dakota in the U.S. Senate from 2013 to 2019, making history as the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate from North Dakota. Her diverse career spans roles including North Dakota's Attorney General and Tax Commissioner, further enriched by her academic background in law. Thank you guys for being here and joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, let me set the stage, I guess, real quick, and for those that are listening, with a brief overview of kind of where the Farm Bill stands today. The current Farm Bill, the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018, was signed into law in 2018 and remains in force through 2023, with some provisions extending beyond this year. The bill reauthorized every 5 years, sets ag, nutrition, conservation, and forestry policy nationally. Congress just passed a year-long extension until September 24. I guess let me stop there and if either of you have how is the Farm Bill looking for 2024? Do you think generally we're in a good position to get one done next year?
I'll jump right in, Heidi, and then I'm very anxious to hear your thoughts on this too. 2024 is an election year, and we know what election years are all about. The differences of opinion tend to get aggravated. So I would say if something doesn't happen in the first few months of the year, then it just becomes more and more unlikely. There are some battlegrounds in this Farm Bill. There's just no doubt about it. And besides that, the Farm Bill is constrained by the budget. So it's an uphill battle under the best of circumstances. Add to that the election year phenomena, and I think we've got some work ahead. And I won't be shocked if we see another extension as the year wears on. Heidi, what are you thinking?
I totally agree that we're likely to see another extension. And I know that an election year, starting probably around June, there isn't going to be a lot of participation. We're going to see both conventions, one in July and one in August, and then it's going to be fun campaigning. And the Farm Bill, I think they understood that, even though the extension goes through the end of September, really nothing of consequence happens under the Farm Bill until the end of the year. And so even though you said the extension is through the end of September, de facto, that when they passed the extension, it was in November. So nothing catastrophic is going to happen. The one thing that I would say is that there is general satisfaction with the current Farm Bill. It's not like we're moving from freedom to farm to an insurance-based system like we did, almost now 20 years ago. That really made a difference for the safety net for North Dakota and American farmers. And so, if there was not widespread kind of satisfaction with the 18 bill, I think there'd be more urgency to do something. But I think it's being kicked down the road and probably won't happen. Reauthorization won't happen until 25.
Yeah, Heidi, I think your point's a good one. Every farm group has a wish list. That's pretty normal. Every farm group would like to see something added, something tweaked. But I agree with your assessment. By and large, I think producers are pretty satisfied with where this Farm Bill is at.
Well, Mr. Secretary, you mentioned a long list, and Almond Alliance sure has a list of priorities in the Farm Bill, and one of those is MAP funding. Generally speaking, globally speaking, can you talk about how farm bills impact trade, and what the implications, both short term and long term, might be?
Yeah, you just mentioned a very important program. You know, when I was in California as Secretary of Agriculture, the three things that were really important was promoting our products worldwide. That's what you're suggesting. The other one was research. Very important that research is ongoing for high value crops. And then the other thing was this whole concept of trade and in extending crop insurance into high value crops. So here's what I would say. I think funding is in a good place now. Again, I think if we ask the question, could we use more funding? The answer to that would be yes. But having said that, with the extension of the Farm Bill, the pressure's kind of off. In addition to that, Secretary Vilsack has been very forward-leaning in terms of using commodity credit funds for trade promotion. So that's the one area where the Farm Bill really makes a difference. You know, you don't negotiate trade agreements through the Farm Bill. That's a whole separate, different process. But you do things like market promotion, and that's a huge piece of what the Farm Bill is about.
Well, if I can just add to that, we've now turned the page on multilateral trade agreements, which every farm group participates in those. They're critical. Those free trade agreements can make the difference on whether we can get soybeans into areas that we would, or lentils into India, whatever the case may be. But the one thing that we need is absolutely to be razor focused on selling our ag products internationally. We grow more than what we can use in this country. It's a force for good in the world. It is a huge opportunity to help rebalance our, imbalance of trade. And especially, as the Secretary said, the high value crops such as almonds, we just need to have a program that makes sure, number one, we don't lock you out of any markets, but number two, that we're opening up the opportunity to introduce these products to various markets. And I think, I think it's only appropriate that your growers are very concerned about the kind of assistance they should receive from the Department of Agriculture and from the United States Congress in promoting these high value crops outside of our country.
Thank you, Senator. So let me ask you this. What are some of the biggest challenges in getting bipartisan support for various aspects of the Farm Bill, and how can we overcome these challenges?
You know what? We always kind of push back a little bit on whether the Farm Bill has bipartisan challenges. A lot of times in the good old days, the challenges were regional. We didn't want to give peanuts anything that wheat didn't get. So we're more interested in promoting our crops as opposed to crops that Mike and I don't see in Nebraska and North Dakota, like peanuts and rice. And so, but with that said, there are a couple pressure points right now with this Farm Bill. The first is always food assistance. There's a different perspective on whether we should add to the work requirements that were put in the initial debt relief package, whether we should do some more further restrictions on the kinds of products that can be basically secured through the SNAP benefits. There's a whole host of things where you'll see more political division. I think just for your growers' understanding, because a lot of ag groups say we should take the nutrition out of the Farm Bill. I say that's absolutely the worst idea anyone could come up with. So two smart men, McGovern and Dole, years ago, paired these two things together because they wanted to make sure that urban legislators, especially in the House of Representatives, had skin in the game on the Farm Bill. And so it keeps the Farm Bill relevant to people where the Farm Bill wouldn't otherwise be relevant. And so it's a critical component. We're going to see fights on SNAP, But interestingly enough, the intersection of the Inflation Reduction Act and the kinds of initiatives that they put in for biofuels, initiatives that were put in for conservation, there's a fight about whether those should be baseline additive to the Farm Bill in conservation and whether those dollars should be retracted and reduced. And that's right now, I think, the biggest challenge. The biggest non-policy challenge is that there are so many new members in Congress right now who have never voted for a farm bill. By that, I mean they've never had a chance to vote. Not that they voted no, they just have never seen a farm bill. And so there's a lot of education that needs to be had on why the farm bill is important to a Manhattan legislator as much as it's important to a North Dakota senator.
Thank you, Senator.
I might add to that, and I agree with everything that Heidi, you've said there, but think about this. This will be the first $1 trillion farm bill. This one is being scored over a 10-year period of time at about $1.5 trillion. A lot of money. I mean, kind of an eye-popping sum, if you will. I think on the Senate side, you and I were both on the Ag Committee. I think at the end of the day, it's pretty bipartisan. We kind of figure out how to work through our differences, and we know we've got to get 60 votes to get it passed in the Senate. So at the end of the day, we want a bipartisan bill to go to the Senate floor so it gets the votes to pass. The House, different deal. Whoever is going to be in charge is going to have a very slim majority. The majority is, 4 or 5 members now, and it can't afford to lose any votes. And there are the battlegrounds that you talked about, SNAP program. That's about 80% of that trillion, trillion and a half. So there'll be some who say, well, it's got to be work requirements. There've got to be cuts. There've got to be this, that, and the next thing. And that just makes it very hard to get it to the finish line. So I think if it was bipartisan, if it was allowed to go on a bipartisan basis in the House, there's enough votes there, but we'll see. It's a different phenomenon on the House side than on the Senate side.
The other thing that I want to add to that too, if I can, is rural America has increasingly become represented by Republican legislators who have a huge stake in delivering this all-important policy to rural America. And so there also is some political considerations for not moving a farm bill to the Republican base, which is really now a rural base.
It's a really good point. Let me ask you this. We've struggled, I would say, as an ag industry to get young farmers more and more engaged in farming than we ever have in history. In what ways do you think the Farm Bill could be improved to better support young and beginning farmers, ensuring the future of agriculture in America?
When I was Secretary of Agriculture and we were doing those Farm Bill listening sessions around the United States, did one in every state when it was all said and done, we would start with a 4-H member and an FFA member. And it really underscored the importance of getting the Farm Bill right for them. But I had one young man, he was in FFA. He got up, he had his blue jacket on, and he said, Mr. Secretary, we want to stay on the farm. And here's the secret to keeping us home on the farm. You have to have profitability in farming and ranching. No truer words were spoken. And that's the key to everything. That's why we do farm bills, is we've got to keep farmers in business. That's how we eat. I mean, it's so obvious it doesn't even need to be said. So I think those programs that help the beginning farmer, and they are there in the Farm Bill. Every administration has tried to figure out what program might help. And so there are a number of programs for beginning farmers, socially disadvantaged farmers, and we've got to keep those programs not only in the Farm Bill, but I think every Farm Bill needs to improve on them. This is an area I feel very strongly about.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think that for some people, the idea is get big or get out. And that automatically reduces the accessibility of farming to so many young people who want to do it. And so I would say, going back to the almond growers, what are the specialty crops that we can promote, that we can help? What are the technologies that we know are available to make a farm unit more profitable, even though it's a smaller unit? What are the strategies that we're deploying to make small state farmer, successful? And I think, and it's not talked enough about, and certainly for large commodity growing states like Nebraska and North Dakota, farm ownership, land ownership has become a huge challenge. And we see a lot of venture capitalists moving in to buying up farmland. I think it's a trend. I think both Nebraska and North Dakota are the two states that are pretty aggressively trying to address corporate and large, non-farm land owners. But these are the challenges that are what I call the lookup challenges. You can think about what's going to be profitability in the next 2 years, but if you're not thinking about what's going to be what's going to make farmers profitable and smaller farmers profitable over the next 10 years, that farm bill is going to fail, because eventually all the farm bill is going to be doing is serving a smaller and smaller percentage of American producers, and it's going to become more and more politically vulnerable.
Heidi, there's so much to talk about. You and I we could spend the rest of the day talking through these issues, but I want to throw an issue out there. Doesn't get a lot of attention, but it's very, very important issue. As farming has become more and more sophisticated, more technology dependent, etc., one of the things that has really been a benefit, not only to almond growers, but really row crop producers, cattlemen, dairy, whatever, and that is the research and development tax credit. For those folks who qualify for that, this is just a tremendous boost to their operation. I mention this only because a few years ago, Congress passed in a piece of legislation a provision that basically said you had to amortize the benefits of that over 5 years. Before that, it was able to be expensed in the first year. That really needs to be changed back. It needs to be changed back so you can expense it in the first year. Everybody will benefit from that. Like I said, if you qualify under the law for that very important benefit, there just isn't any reason why you shouldn't be able to expense it in the year that you incur the expenses.
And Mike, can I just add to that, as put on my former tax official hat? This isn't about escaping taxation. This is about timing. And as we see new technologies, whether it's AI driven, whether it is, autonomous driven, we see these new technologies. If we want to get early adapters, then we need to make it lucrative, and expensing those kinds of expenses that are R&D as opposed to amortizing them doesn't cost the government anything, just means that you get the benefit right up front. You don't have to wait for 5 years to get the benefit of this tax break.
Wonderful. Well, Mr. Secretary, you brought up FFA, and as a former FFAer, I have to give a shout out to Clovis FFA in California. But I'll let you know this. I was just in Omaha visiting my good friend, Brady Revels from Omaha, who I happened to meet through FFA. So, great program.
Can I just say that in Illinois, the fastest growing youth group is FFA, and it's not just in rural areas. It's a leadership program that a lot of urban kids are getting involved in. I've met a lot of them at conferences in Illinois, and I'm just impressed with the quality of that program. So yay for you being a former FFA. But those of us who have entertained these young people in their blue corduroy jackets when it's 100 degrees outside, really appreciate the innovation that's coming from that youth organization.
Well, Senator, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about this. California and North Dakota's almond industry in North Dakota have a huge connection. We talked about it a little bit before, but would you like to highlight that connection and give a little plug for North Dakota?
I would. This is so funny. I always tell I always look for the North Dakota connection, then try and take credit for something great happening in the country and say North Dakota helps. One of the most lucrative streams of income for bee growers in North Dakota. And North Dakota, I think, switches off between maybe Nebraska or Kansas as the number one honey producer in the country. But where they really make their money is shipping our pollinators to the almond groves, so that we can help out the almond growers. And so we like to take credit for the California almond industry by telling them that our pollinators are out there doing the job for California almonds. And this is such, I mean, it's a crop that has emerged. Everybody who's ridden on a plane gets a bag of almonds. It's a healthy snack. It is, and we should be proud that they're grown in this country. And we should understand, I think my illustration isn't just about bragging, but it's about how interconnected the states are in supporting agriculture, that you just don't have California's almonds and North Dakota bees. There's an interconnection there that makes all of that profitable on both sides.
Wonderful. Well, I've got two last questions, and then we'll wrap it up. But first, what lessons can we learn from previous farm bills that could help shape more effective ag policies as we move forward through the next year?
I'll take that first, Mike. What I would tell you is show up. I think a lot of people just think, oh, well, it doesn't matter if I write. It doesn't matter if I engage with my representative. It doesn't, who am I? What I would tell you is you're a constituent, and certainly for the House of Representatives, if you're in a district where maybe you're seen as a rural district, as an urban district, but you know that you're a big part of rural California, you've got to show up. You've got to tell your story. You've got to be there arguing for your share of the research pie, for your share of the MAP funding, for your share of, tell your story and ask to be a participant in decision making. And if you don't ask, the answer is going to be the same. It's going to be nothing. And so I get engaged and understand the process, and don't be afraid to tell your story, because that's what legislators love.
The second thing I would add to that, I agree with everything you've said, Heidi. Very important that ag groups are engaged and people associated with agriculture engaged. But I would, as you work with your elected representatives in the House and in the Senate, just have to insist that the Farm Bill be a bipartisan effort. You can't pass a Republican Farm Bill. You can't pass a Democrat Farm Bill. You have to pass a farm bill that's good for the country, where Republicans and Democrats join forces and get it to the finish line. That's the only way it's going to happen. I appreciate how divided things are these days, and it's awful hard to say to somebody who's been elected out of a Democrat area or Republican area, you need to be bipartisan. But that's the only way this bill happens. And we just have to make it clear that that's what we're expecting, is that you work across the aisle, you join forces, you get the farm bill done.
And if I can just add one other thing, I say this to my corn growers, I say it to anyone: stay in your lane, stay focused on your priorities. Maybe there's some things that are happening in the STAP program you don't like. If you really care about your programs, don't put more water in your boat. It's harder to float your boat if you take on unnecessary issues. And so be very strategic about what your advocacy is, and try and stay away from the political hotspots, no matter how you feel personally about them.
I think that's great advice across the board. Let me ask you a more specific question. For a grower that has never been involved, or a processor that's never been involved truly in advocating for a farm bill, what can they do locally to advocate for a farm bill? What can they do locally with their legislators? What does that look like?
What I would strongly recommend is get involved. Every ag organization, whether it's almond growers, whether it's corn, soybean, cattle, hogs, dairy, whatever. I could go on and on. There are associations, there are groups at the local level, at the state level, and then at the federal level who have an impact, who really, really do make a difference. We set aside time in my Senate office to meet with these groups. I did the same thing as Secretary of Agriculture. So that individual that is out there saying, how can I be involved? Get involved with your local organization. Give them some of that very precious resource, which is your time. And you might find it compelling and interesting and see the difference you're making. And that takes you to maybe the state level and the federal level. So that's the oil that keeps the machinery going. It's the people out there who say, this is important to me, but this is important to my state and my community. So I'm going to get engaged. It's exactly what, Heidi, you were saying when you answered this question at the start. It's engagement. You got to get involved.
I totally agree with what Mike's saying, but beyond that, so you're sitting at the coffee table with a number of growers who have the same concerns that you do. Every senator, every legislator has a state office. And I know, Mike, you had offices all over Nebraska. I had offices all over North Dakota. Make an appointment with the local representative, the local staff person. Go in and say, we want the senator, or we want our representative to understand what our concerns are. I mean, if you write a letter, sometimes that gets in the tally, but it doesn't have the same impact as getting involved with these groups and actually going to Washington to lobby, or getting involved in these groups and lobby as much as you can there. And if you can't find a group that you think is advocating, create your own group. 20 of you making a decision in a swing district to say, look, this is important to us. You'll get heard. You'll get heard, certainly in states like North Dakota, which is a lot smaller than California. Though that your legislative districts are about the same size as North Dakota. Get into those offices, make an appointment, and if you don't get an appointment, make it be heard in other ways that they aren't interested in what you have to say. But I'll bet you they'll give you an appointment.
I think that's spot on. I've always found that district staff wants to know what's going on and what people are feeling in the state and district, and being able to make that relationship with local district staff matters a lot.
Yep.
So, well, I appreciate you both joining. Final word, it's yours.
I'll have a final word. Number one, it's always great to be here with Mike. I mean, you can see how we get things like the 18 Farm Bill done, or even the 13 Farm Bill done, because we approach this with a spirit of bipartisanship. But for this next Farm Bill, the three things that I think you need to focus on is conservation, it is exports, and it is striking the right kind of balance and making sure that specialty crops are not left behind. You'd be surprised at the number of advocates you have in that lane. Debbie Stabenow loves apples. I mean, and so she understands she's the chair of the Ag Committee, won't be in 25 because she's retiring, but she has brought a sensitivity along with John Bozeman for the importance of those specialty crops. So don't think that you're going to ignore it because you're not a soybean grower. Specialty crops have a role and a place in American agriculture, and I think most smart people recognize that.
Yeah, I'll give a perfect example of what Heidi is driving at here. When I was Ag Secretary, as I said, we did these Farm Bill listening sessions throughout the country. I went out to California and I heard about the importance of crops like almonds. That was different for me. I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in row crop country on a dairy farm. So all of a sudden I'm hearing about a whole different side of agriculture. But what really struck me is that there were counties in California that were larger producers of ag products value-wise than whole states. I mean, it was a phenomena, that the power of agriculture. So it's what we have been saying. It's get engaged, show up at these things, be an advocate for what you believe in. Things like research money, things like conservation money, they just make a huge difference across the United States. So can't encourage people enough. Stay engaged, stay active, insist on a bipartisan bill. We'll get this to the finish line. It may not be in the timeline that we want, but it's going to get to the finish line. But we need people to hang in there with us and keep telling their House member and their senator, we need a farm bill, we need to get it done.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary and Senator, for your insightful perspectives. Your experience and knowledge has greatly contributed to our understanding of the Farm Bill and the impact on the ag sector today. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on Almond Alert. Stay tuned for more discussions on key issues in the almond industry. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you for having us.